I'm creeping up on year 2 of being a paramedic this January, which blows my mind because I still don't know what I'm doing.
Hmm.
I do, but also, um,
Hmm.
I still, with all of this stuff, with all this knowledge, and I just hit 3 years total in EMS. I'm still learning things. I'm still learning how to do some things easier and med math. Whoa, still not my friend. We get there, but yeah, just it was always, it felt like this pressure to go out in the field because you're doing your ride times with these experienced providers, and you're finding all these people in the field that like they've been in this for a minute versus like you're not even at day one. And so
Hmm.
for me, I had this a huge amount of pressure on myself of like, well, I'm not going to be good enough because I don't know all this stuff. Like, no, baby, like, no, give yourself some grace.
I think you're spot on with that. That's one of the things I was trying to do with medic mindset when I started it, was try to alleviate something that now I'm remembering I really felt in those first years, which was I thought I was the only one who didn't know stuff. And once I started teaching and talking to these new grads who are out in the field, I heard, or seasoned paramedics, once I started talking to them, I realized like, oh, we're all a mess and like we're all struggling and we all don't know everything. And everyone has their like weaknesses in their practice and we're all making mistakes. It's a highly fallible field that we've gotten into. It's just set up for, it's mistake prone because it's, at odd hours on limited sleep with rapid decision making needed with very little data. Right. So, I would tell myself that, but I don't know that I would have believed it. Right. And that's the thing with advice is like, it's really hard to change. Let's say I wanted to change a behavior today, right? I wanted to start doing something or stop doing something. It's really hard to change human behavior for yourself, much less like try to give somebody words that's going to change their behaviors or their thought process. So I wish maybe a good way to say is I wish I had known early, because no one talked about it early in my career, that we were all honestly like we all messing up at times, you know, in smaller ways and bigger ways, but everybody's messing up some stuff. Because when I made some errors in the field, it knocked my feet out from under me. And I thought I was the only one. I thought I was not as good as everyone else. And having done the podcast now, I've talked to enough paramedics and asked them, what's your favorite failure? What's your mistake that you try to tell other people, don't go make this mistake. I've heard insane stories, like really helpful stories.
I feel that part about I wouldn't believe myself because anytime I do something, um, and like not something egregious, not something that like I'm not out here like killing people left and right, not like that,
Sure.
putting patients' lives in risk. But like I do something, I'll call my supervisor and I'll be like, oh God, I did this thing. Am I fired? I'm quitting tomorrow. Like, here's my 2 weeks. I'm done. I don't deserve this job. And he's like, typically they're like, Alexis, please take a breath, put on your uniform in the morning, learn from this thing. You're
Mhm.
fine. Stop. And I go home and I'm like, what if I just quit tonight? One time I looked at my partner and I was like, I looked at my patch on my shoulder and I just kind of like grabbed at it. I'm like, I don't deserve this. It's yours now.
Oh, no, you do deserve it.
I worked
I've
hard
talked
enough
to
to do it.
I've talked to 15, 20-year medics who I could, just this month I talked to a medic, very seasoned, who gave aspirin to someone who had a allergy to aspirin. And we all think, how in the world could that happen? Right? Like that's like EMT level stuff. How in the world could that happen? But if you paint the right story, we can understand how they came to make that decision. Right. So I'll paint the story. The story is nursing home patient, when the paramedic got there, the staff was about to give them aspirin because they were having chest pain. And they said, we're about to give aspirin, but we hadn't got there yet. You walked in, so we haven't given it yet. Okay. Then an inexperienced partner who the paramedic who gave the aspirin, they had asked their partner to look through all the paperwork and look for allergies, but that inexperienced partner is like having trouble finding it. They never really say anything. The paramedic asks the patient, are you allergic to anything? They say no. Are you allergic to aspirin? They say no. Later, they realize that they have Alzheimer's, right? But you paint that whole story and it's like, yeah, like we could all make that mistake because the staff was already about to give aspirin. So you're thinking like, obviously the staff wouldn't be giving it if they have an allergy. You have a partner who's not telling you there's any allergies on the paperwork, right? So this is the limited data and the speed that we're working with, that it really creates an unfavorable decision-making environment. And so errors do happen to really good, really smart people.
Absolutely. And I think a big part of that in this field is accepting that, like, you are a human being. Your brain can only hold so much information at any given time. And then you add in like those little adrenaline dumps. And then you add in the pressure of looking at the patient and the vital signs and or family on scene who are running around with like chickens with their head cut off. And then sometimes you have that pressure of like, we need to go right now. And then you have to do all of these things on the way to the hospital. And so like, we're humans. You're going to make mistakes, but it's not just you make these little mistakes and do this thing, but you learn from it and you move on, honestly, until the next one.
Mm-hmm. And a mentor taught me this after I made a mistake in the field. He said, honor that patient by telling anyone who will listen about it, right? So we can tell everyone in the system that's working in the same system as you, this, like after some root cause analysis, this system allowed this error to happen. You're working in this system, so watch out, right? Because it could easily, if all the little holes in the cheese line up, happen to you as well. So that's kind of our obligation to honor those patients that we are practicing on. We're practicing medicine.
I really like that because I'm not going to go into detail about it. There was recently one patient that I made a mistake, and it's not something that realistically like changed the outcome of what happened, but it's
it rarely does, right? We know.
But and that's the thing. It's like when I was doing the thing, I was like, oh, okay, like, whatever. But then after the fact, I had to do like a whole QIC with our coordinator guy. And he was like, did you know that this is one of the contraindications? And I just started bawling. I was like, dude, I'm such an idiot. Like, so now anytime it's that situation again, that circumstance, I'm like, oh, I ain't make that mistake again. Like,
for sure.
Fool me once, shame on me.
So can I ask, did you have what we call a knowledge deficit? Did you not know that information, or did you, and I'm not asking for you to elaborate on the case, but like when they said, did you know, was your answer, no, I didn't know that? It was a knowledge deficit.
It was it was more of like I completely forgot. Yeah. And it's not like I didn't forget the dosage. I didn't forget the side effects. It's literally like that small little fine detail. And when I was talking to one of my friends about it, who was a flight medic and teaches, like he's an EMS god, I told him about it and he was like, dude, they preach about that, they talk about it, but like it is such a small instance. So then it made me feel better because I'm like, okay, I'm not just like an idiot who hasn't really like, I forgot about that from paramedic school, I guess. I mean, right. I can tell you everything about the medication now because I went home crying and I'm looking at that medication. I'm like, oh no, I will never give it again in this circumstance. Oh
Right.
no.
Well,
But
we're not specialists. We're generalists. We have to know every body system, right? So it's like there's stuff you will learn and forget and have to relearn. It's not like we can just hold it all. It is impossible to hold it all in there all the time because we're not just like just doing neurosurgery, like just one little thing every day. We have to know the full everything,
yeah. And
all body systems.
I heard somebody say one time, we're not a master of one thing. We are, what is it? We are trained to be experts of all the things. Shout out to the endocrine system that still I do not understand.
Yeah. Until you see like thyroid storm or myxedema coma and you'll be like, I totally learned this once and it's been a while.
That
and I've forgotten.
Yeah. Okay, so Ginger Locke,
I'm here.
tell me about your podcast. I know you've talked about it. Tell me like you addressed, like, why did you start it up? What do you want people to get from your podcast?
Yeah, those are good questions. So the why I started it was I kind of alluded to before that I wanted medics who were new to the field or in paramedic school to hear other medics being authentic. And so the first couple of years, I kept the guests anonymous so they could just speak freely about patients and didn't have to worry about protected health information or, ramifications for them from their employer. So they were anonymous and they really, kudos to them. They were very brave and spoke very freely about mishaps or, just like things that we all experience on shift or are, awkward things like when you spend 24 hours with a partner and you start to confuse that like camaraderie with romantic love, or like all these like phenomenon that no one's really talking about, but people need to hear. And so that's kind of what the first episodes were. And that was my goal. I kept getting these phone calls from graduates who would tell me these really like intimate, vulnerable things. I'm like, you need to be telling each other this stuff. I don't need to know anymore. I'm not in the field. And so I thought, well, if I could get them to talk to each other, that'd be great, but they probably wouldn't do it. So I thought, well, I'll record these conversations and share them that way. That was the idea. And what I hope people are getting from it is some normalization about the bizarre work that we do and realizing that they're not alone when they have kind of this bizarre experience or response to the job.
I'm glad you said that because like when I found the podcast, I went on this whole like rabbit hole where I started from the very beginning and I caught myself up. And like I find these podcasts that are like educational based because I feel like it keeps me up to date. I feel like I review some other stuff, blah, blah, blah. But like your podcast was something that I was like, okay, like I'm kind of like I said, like I'm a human being, but it's also things that like these other providers bring up. And I'm like, oh, dang, like, okay, well, I'm going to take that and put it in the back of the cranium. And if that situation arises or in that topic sense, like I'm going to take that and run with it. And then some of the things that were discussed, I was like, holy cow, like I feel that, like I relate to that. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember which episode specifically. I remember where I was when I listened to it. I was in the parking lot of a bank. I don't know why, probably crying over my account. But you went to, I think it was a conference, and you had met this group of providers, and it was just like this raw, hard discussion about, I'm going to be honest, I don't remember what it was specifically. I vividly remember listening to it and like you were getting emotional and some of those other providers were getting emotional. And it was something that at the time it hit very close to home. I'll be honest with you, I sobbed in the middle of that bank parking lot because like it resonated so hard. And that's one of the many things I like about your podcast is that it resonates. You feel it and it resonates. And your guests, like it's some seriousness, but like also they're fun. Like recently you had the one you recorded outside with the weather guy, and I loved it so much.
I enjoyed that a lot too. I enjoy them all. I mean, they're just conversations. It's like I carve out this dedicated time to have conversations that I don't know if I would otherwise, like I'm doing with you right now, right? I really enjoy it a lot. Just the one-on-one, no particular topic that we're trying to tackle or teach. It's just authentic sharing. And when people really relax and I see them relax while we're recording, I'm like, we're getting it. We're getting it now. The useful stuff.
Right. And that's why, like, even with you, when I sent out these questions and bullet points and stuff, I told you, I'm like, we may not hit some of this and we may be all over the place. And that is 100% what I want. Like, I don't want this to be a scripted hit XYZ. Like, honestly, when I started out, I used to do. And I talked to one of my friends who has, it's not EMS related, but like he has a pretty influential podcast. And I was like, Riley, like, how are you doing this? Like, what are you doing? And he was like, don't write exactly what you're going to say. Like, just go off of it. And I was like, is that enough? He's like, you'll make it enough. You will feel what's right. And so, I love it.
You look like you're enjoying it. It's great.
I do.
That's good.
Sometimes it feels a little bit like a job because like I, in my personal life and also at work, like I overpack my schedule and it hurts. So like last week I recorded 3 episodes in 2 days. And so after that last one, I was like, man, I'm never doing this again. But no,
so let's hover there for a second because you were talking about the Weatherman, which was the last episode. And you said recently I released that. I released that in February and I haven't released an episode since. I've actually been taking a break and I didn't tell anyone I'm taking a break. I'm just taking a break because I want to enjoy it. Like that's I've always wanted to create something that I enjoyed and because it will be sustainable as long as I'm enjoying it. And so I think it's okay to take breaks, you know. It's better than just like quitting altogether, right? Recharge.
Right. And that's so with that in mind, I am like, I have this one today. Happy Labor Day. I think I have a minute before I'm gonna record another one because I'm pulling in so much overtime right now. And then I have some other personal stuff coming up. And then this month we have the EMS World Expo conference. And so I'm not trying to do all of this stuff and burn myself out.
Right.
Like I'm going to feel a little crispy at the end of all these overtime shifts and then show up for the World Expo conference feeling tired and then come back and be like, well, I got to record some more episodes. Like you're saying, like just keep it alive and fresh.
Just keep it alive. That's the for me, it was like, I want it to be sustainable. How can I do this for 10 years? I'm on year 7 now. How can I, what would it take? What do I need to build so I can do that? And for me, it was only like once a month that I released one. Then when I realized, you know, I've got enough going on in my personal life, I need to take a break, taking a break.
Yeah. There's no blueprint to success for your podcast. That's just, it is what it is. And granted, this is coming from me who I just hit a year since I've started my podcast. I have a very, I wouldn't say small following. It's decent enough. It's a lot more than I ever thought it would be. And then with Master Your Medics coming in and be like, hey, we want to help you along the way. And I'm like, oh, really? Why? So you sure? I told Jeff whenever like we had the initial phone call, I was like, dude, are you sure you want to do this? Like, do you know what I do? How I sound? when I talk about. Sometimes it's kind of silly, but so I do want to ask, what's the most impactful call you've had in EMS? Either the most interesting, the funniest, the most, I mean, emotionally impacting. What you got? Whatever you're, and again, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, I would share anything. I don't have any. I've learned to like the antidote to shame is authenticity, right? So just like I lay stuff out there. It helps me. So there's a call that I share every semester with the graduating class, and it's one I think I've talked about on my podcast. It was the call that knocked my feet out from under me in terms of like questioning, am I the only dummy here, that I was referencing earlier? I made a mistake and it was a diagnostic error. And I think that call actually planted the seed for the genesis for the podcast, because I got really interested in how in the world did I make that mistake? And it was in my thinking, it was in my decision making, and like what ingredients did it take for me to make that error? How could that happen? Right. So if I think I'm smart and I've been good on all the other calls and I've done well at school and I think this about myself, how in the world could this happen? And so I started looking at kind of system design and how we teach and how the brain works. And it really kind of started a lot of my investigation into decision making, reading books like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking. Or there's a whole other school of thought by Gary Klein, who talks about recognition prime decision making. I just really dug into all that because I'm like, how in the world did this happen? So this was in Texas in the summer, so it was hot. And we were called for an unknown, unresponsive, or not unknown. He was a 60-year-old, 60s-year-old unresponsive on the side of the road. So on the way to the call, we're thinking like, did he get hit by a car? Like he was on the side of the road. So we're thinking trauma. And then when we got there, he was in fact unresponsive, and the police were there, and the patient had a few little ants on him. And the police said, we know this guy, he's a user. And so when somebody puts info in your head like that, that's called, the cognitive bias that happens as a result of that is called anchoring. So you kind of like the first piece of data you get is you often anchor to that, and you have trouble expanding your differential beyond that. But I was able to keep my differential broad because I saw the ants. I'm thinking, oh, maybe this is an allergic reaction. And we got the monitor on him. My partner got the monitor on him too fast because I anchored on the monitor. So he was in a narrow complex tachycardia. The rate was 194 was the number I saw displayed. And I've looked at the rhythm since. I still obsess over this rhythm and show the students. So rate 194, what I did is I entered a loop in my brain, which is if the heart rate is greater than 160, SVT, unresponsive, this is unstable, right? So I very quickly, without gathering enough data, used what's called system 1 thinking, which are heuristics, which are very quick little loops we have in our brain to make very quick decisions. When people are really sick, you need to make quick decisions. And I stopped really collecting data or being able to absorb data. And so heart rate 194 is unresponsive. I'm thinking unstable. So we treated it like unstable SVT, like you do. Once he started not responding to all the treatments for SVT, like adenosine, like synchronized cardioversion, like amiodarone, like I started all these treatments, he was never responding to it. And so we were like, I guess we'll take him to the hospital, And then when we got to the hospital, I'm still thinking he's in SVT. I hadn't had a broad differential. They said his core temp is like 105.9, I think. He's in heat stroke. And I was like, that I had enough data to think that, right? It's super hot out. It's August in Texas. He's on the side of the road. there was no car around. He had been walking for some period of time, and he was warm to the touch. He was dry, and he had a strong radial pulse. And so with a strong radial pulse, that doesn't really mean he's unstable. He had actually a pretty decent blood pressure, but my brain did this unresponsive equals unstable thing in my head, because when we think about hemodynamic stability, we think about level of consciousness, blood pressure, skin signs. And I just really stuck to that unresponsive part and thinking that his rate was causing him to be unresponsive. But if I thought critically and thought, oh, his blood pressure is decent, radial pulses are decent, the skin is pink or even red. If I had slowed down and used more system 2 thinking and collected more data before starting treatment, I think I would have gotten a temp or thought about heat stroke. And so it was a diagnostic failure. I mean, it was just I really anchored on that heart rate, one piece of data, right? The 194, and thought, oh, I know what this is. So I think that's it was not SVT, it was sinus tachycardia, right? And when you look at the rhythm strip, you can't see the P waves because they're buried in the T wave. Occasionally you can see a little blip on the T wave that shows a P. But people can be in sinus tachycardias at very, very fast rates. Sepsis patients in particular. I guarantee you have a listener right now who has seen a sepsis patient that they thought was SVT, that they gave diltiazem to or something else to rate control, and that wasn't good for them, right? So the takeaway that for the students when I'm teaching, and the one I needed to know that day, was that people's max heart rate is 220 minus their age in years. But I mean, that's a number. People can do better. When I go work out, I can really max out my heart rate, but I'm not in a SVT. I'm in a sinus tachycardia. It's a good learning case because my differential was too narrow. I had premature closure.
If there's not one listener, it's me. Because when you were talking about that, I was like, oh gosh, golly, like SVT. And then you said he wouldn't react. I'm like, what's this guy's deal?
Yeah.
Oh, oops. A for effort.
I never thought about what's this guy's deal. I'm like, why are none of the treatments working? Luckily, he lived despite me.
Sir, am I not good enough for you?
But that was one of those occasions where it's like I did all this stuff, but it did not negatively affect his outcome. He got to the ER. They cooled him, right? He recovered fully. But it's still like, I know that my brain now, I know this thing about myself. It's like, ooh, my brain is not as perfect as I thought. And that was a big start of Medic Mindset, was realizing like, I'm interested in how the brain works and thinking of it as like this imperfect tool.
And it goes back to like what we talked about earlier, was you're in those heat of the moment scenes and scenarios. And man, I'm not gonna lie, I really feel like if I was in your shoes, like what happened to me last night, I see one thing and I'm like, oh gosh, golly, here we go. Do all these things and then they don't work, which we dropped off the ER and I came back, like I got all my stuff reported and whatever, came back in for some signatures and to waste some ketamine, poor lady. And I looked at the doctor. I'm like, hey, like, how is she doing? He was like, well, I think we got her at his SVT, or y'all did. Somebody did. But now she's just in sinus tach and we don't know what's going on. And I walked back to the ambulance and I'm like, you know what? Me either. But at least I'm not the only one. I don't have empty behind my name. I never will have empty behind my name. But if Mr. White Coat don't know what's going on, at least I also was at least able to recognize, do something, and bring him to the ER.
Yeah, the failure in decision making is not making some, right? If you make no decisions, you don't move things along. And if you can make a decision, that's the best one you have at the time, you're poking the system and you might get new data that kind of comes out of it. when you try something, you're like, oh, there's all this fresh set of data that I have now, and now I can make a better decision. But the error is to not make any decisions, right? Just sit there.
If you're not doing anything and you don't know what to do something. And you
with the information that you have available to you, right? The best decision you can at the time.
Right. And at the core of every call is an EMT call of ABCs. That is something I always harp on, is like, if you don't know what else to do, ABCs, and if you get through your ABCs and there's no life threat, go back to C, put a little blanket on them, like do something. Like, there's always something to do. Well, thank you for sharing that story, because it takes a lot to be vulnerable like that. And especially sharing that with other early on providers to just kind of get that baseline of like, like we talked about, we are human, we make mistakes, and the whole point is to grow from them. We are not designed to be perfect.
And under pressure, we will default to these quick little things in our brain, like I did. Unresponsive equals unstable. And that is not the case. Other things can make people unresponsive, but they're hemodynamically stable, right? But we have these little, what are called heuristics. They're very quick, automated responses that sometimes we have to like put the brakes on those automated responses.
Yeah. My partner does a really good job of when I start doing things and I'm trying to think those 5 steps ahead, and I start like that, those moments, she has a really good way of looking at me being like, Lex, slow down. What comes next? And it's not like this, I'm frantic and I'm like fumbling things and dropping things. So like, it's not that. I'm literally just so caught in that, honestly, like one track mindset of like, I have to do all of this right now. And she's like, hey, because I've told her the first day we worked together, I was like, I understand that sometimes it's life and death. I understand that sometimes we're in a rush, but I told her, I was like, sometimes we just need those 5 seconds to breathe, stop, and we'll move on. I was like, 5 seconds, honestly, even in a cardiac arrest, even if someone's having a heart attack or a stroke, 5 seconds is not going to make a difference.
Correct. Using those 5 seconds to breathe and center yourself. It's so great that you have a partner that can see you and see that you need it, because when we're in it, we don't know it about ourselves. We don't have that like ability to see ourselves. And so that's great that you have a partner and a relationship where y'all can do that for each other.
Yeah.
I love that.
I'll brag. She's my partner. She's my best friend, and she's the best one out there. She's talking about going back to paramedic school, and I think she'll be the best medic out there, but also it hurts my heart because I don't want to lose her. So
I hear you.
But we've talked about a lot. We have gone over so many topics. Is there anything else you want to throw in? Anything else I'm going to leave the listeners/viewers with?
Yeah, I think I will talk about EMS podcasting, and particularly women that are in EMS podcasting. If anyone's listening that has any desire to become an EMS podcaster, male or female, I say go for it, because the benefits of it are tremendous. The amount of the personal growth that I've experienced, the professional growth that I've experienced, it has been the best part of my career in EMS. It's been very, very meaningful, and it's creative work, right? So it's fun. You get to meet other creative people. I think we need more EMS podcasts. It feels like there's a lot, but I think that's okay. I think that EMS podcasters are not competing against each other. What EMS podcasters are competing against is Netflix. Right. So trying to get people into the genre of because you'll meet these people and they'll say, I'm not a podcast listener. No, I don't do podcasts. Right. And so if we can just get people into listening, then they find there's plenty of time to listen to multiple EMS podcasters. So yeah, I would just say if anybody needs any support with tech or learning how to get started, you can email me at ginger@medicmindset.com. And that's something I really, really enjoy doing. I've done it for other EMS podcasters, and we'll just talk shop and questions you have along the way.
I'm glad you said that. One of the reasons I started mine was literally, it was because I was like, I have a lot of things to say and I don't know where to say them. Um, and it kind of grew and developed in this thing where I'm like, I'm going to have these people on to talk about things that like they specialize in or they know a lot about, and I'm going to learn a lot. And I've said it in so many episodes, like, this is for y'all, but mostly it's for me. I'm glad you're along for the journey.
Right.
But
Totally.
I had a lot of pushback from people early on, and someone that was on the podcast told me straight up, she was like, I thought the same thing, but I started this podcast with a gear towards new EMTs and even like newer paramedics. Like, I mean, I still am, just as a way to help, but it kind of was this mindset of, well, you're still new in the field, what do you know? And I like doing this to show people that, like, I mean, I still say, like, I don't feel like I really know what I'm doing, but I'm here doing it. Like, and like you said, like, just if you want to do it, get your general structure of what you want to do and like, just do it. Worst case, for me, it's a big part of just my outlet. Like, this is just something that I still feel like I'm learning in the field about. I'm learning about people in general. But also it's just like, it makes me feel good, which, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, in order for it to be sustainable, it's got to scratch your own itch. You've got to get something out of it. It can't just be altruism, like trying to, you have to enjoy it also. And I totally disagree with novices have tremendous value because they are seeing things from a perspective that is not like ground down. It's like they're getting the fresh look at this whole world of EMS, and you're close to your learning. You've just learned this stuff. And so you haven't gotten as rusty. I think novices are like this untapped, really interesting brain and perspective. So don't listen to you need to be experienced to have a podcast. That's just not the case. You can be, and there's value there, but there's tremendous value in hearing from people new to the profession that have this fresh take on everything.
I would say if you're interested in starting a podcast, if you want to do this thing, take my stance to just be stubborn enough to say like, oh well, okay, I'm doing it anyways. You can't tell me what to do.
Yep. I love it.
I'm a grown woman. I do what I want. I'm not ungovernable though. So, Ginger, if that's all you got, that's all I got. You don't know how much it means to have had you on the podcast. I would love to have you back on. Obviously, I'm a huge fan. I'm super impressed by what you've done, what you're gonna keep doing. I'm a huge fan. If you ever need somebody in your corner, just like call me up and I'll be like, Ginger, you're awesome. Keep going.
I appreciate that very much. And usually I'm on the other side of the microphone, so I know how hard it is to kind of figure out how to carry a conversation or structure it. It's a lot of work. And you've done a really good job. And as I said at the beginning, the reason it was an immediate yes was because I wanted to support other women. And I think this is kind of the last thing I'll say, because I think many things, but this is the last thing I'll say. I think for a long time, and probably still, women, we have been taught that there's one seat at the table for a woman and that the table would be filled up with a bunch of other men, but there's only one seat for that tokenism, kind of token woman, and that we were in competition. And that is not the case. There's one woman's victory is good. A rising tide lifts all ships, right? And so women supporting other women is kind of like the future of what I think a woman's experience should include: championing other women and supporting each other and not competing. We are not competing for one chair anymore. There's one seat at the table. Once we get at the table, we champion others and bring them in. That's the last thing I'm going to preach about.
Ain't no competition here, baby. Everybody's here for everybody else. So, Ginger, like I said, I appreciate having you on. I'm excited for what this is going to be, excited for all the things we talked about. Excited for the discussion that's going to be brought up, because I know people are going to have a lot to say about a lot of things.
Yeah,
So,
good.
so yeah, and as I end every single episode, and it's never going to change. So with that,
the 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.